The diary slipped from her hands and landed on the marble floor with a dull thud, the pale ribbon unraveling as pages fanned open. The little girl gasped and dropped to her knees, clutching it tightly before anyone else could touch it. Her voice trembled but carried through the lobby. "Please, you have to read this. It's from my mom." The security guard loomed above her, his tone clipped. "Miss, you can't be here. Where are your parents?" "I came alone," she said, standing straighter than a 6-year-old should. Her brown eyes shone with defiance, though her small fist shook around the worn journal. She said only he can read it. A ripple of curiosity spread through the polished glass atrium as strangers slowed, their whispers echoing off steel and stone. The receptionist fumbled with her headset. "Sweetheart, who do you mean?" The girl swallowed, steadying her breath. "Daniel Whitmore." The name stilled the air. Heads turned. Even the guard's stance faltered. And then a voice cut cleanly across the tension. Low, commanding, unmistakable. "What's happening here?" The crowd shifted as Daniel Whitmore himself stepped into view, phone still in one hand, his other resting on the folded coat draped over his arm. His presence drew silence, polished shoes striking against marble with unhurried authority. The guard straightened immediately. "Apologies, sir. She came in claiming to have something for you. I was escorting her out." Daniel's gaze dropped to the small figure standing alone in her faded dress and oversized pink backpack. Her hair was mussed, her lips pressed thin as if holding back words too heavy for her age. But it wasn't her trembling that held him. It was her eyes, locked on him like she'd been waiting. The girl stepped forward, holding out the diary with both hands. The ribbon dangled, her voice steady despite the quiver in her chest. "Can you read this for me? Please. It's very important." For a moment, Daniel didn't move. He studied the journal, its worn fabric cover, edges frayed, faint ink smudged by years of handling. Then, slowly, he reached for it. The child didn't flinch this time. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice quieter now, though the lobby hung on every word. "Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." The journal settled into his grip, heavier than its size should allow. He glanced at the girl again. Something in her gaze pricked at him, something he couldn't place yet. But already, a part of him knew, whatever was inside those pages, it wasn't business. It was personal. The name written on the page meant nothing to him, but the child's eyes did. Something in them pierced through the armor he had worn for years. Daniel Whitmore, the man who prided himself on never letting feelings interfere with decisions, felt the faintest fracture in the walls he had built, just enough to remind him that he was human. He looked down at the fragile journal again, then back at her. "I'll read it," he said finally. Emily's shoulders dropped, a quiet breath escaping her. "Thank you," she whispered. For her, it was more than gratitude, it was trust. For him, it was the first time in years he hadn't turned his back. Later, in the corner office high above the city, Daniel sat alone with the journal resting on his desk. The pale ribbon had been untied and smoothed flat, set carefully to the side. He traced the cover once before opening it. The handwriting inside was delicate, looping in dark ink, though water stains blurred sections into faint shadows. He steadied his hands before turning the first page. "If Daniel ever sees this, it means I wasn't strong enough. But our daughter deserves to know everything." His chest tightened. He could almost hear the voice behind the words. He turned another page, and then his breath caught. The signature at the bottom was clear, familiar. Sarah Carter. Her name struck him like a blow. He hadn't said it aloud in years, but the sound of it filled his mind instantly. Sarah, the woman who once lit his world. The woman who had disappeared 7 years ago without explanation. He shut his eyes, and the memories came unbidden. Sarah, with her paint-stained hands and sunlit laughter. She had dragged him out of grief after his mother's death, pulling him into street fairs and late-night diners, teaching him that life was more than boardrooms and deals. She was a muralist who painted with wild colors and lived as if every wall could bloom into something beautiful. She was his future, or so he thought. Until one morning, she was simply gone. Her number disconnected. Her apartment emptied. It was as though she had been erased. He had buried himself in work after that, sealing every door to his heart until there was nothing left but ambition. Whitmore Holdings became his world. And now, here she was again, her words pressed into paper, carried by a child who looked at him with eyes he couldn't ignore. He turned the page slowly. I kept our daughter safe as long as I could, but I don't have the strength to keep this from you anymore. If you're reading this, then she's found her way to you. Please take care of her. Love her. She is the best part of both of us." Daniel's throat tightened. He closed the journal for a moment, staring at his reflection in the glass wall across the office. The man staring back at him was older, harder, a version of himself Sarah wouldn't recognize. A soft knock broke the silence. He didn't move. The knock came again, lighter this time. "Come in," he said, his voice low. Emily stepped inside, the pink backpack still clinging to her small shoulders. She held the strap with one hand, her knuckles pale. Her gaze flickered to the journal on his desk. Daniel rose slowly, every movement weighted. "Is it really from her?" he asked. Emily nodded. "My mom said, you were the only person who ever made her feel safe." His composure slipped. He sank back into the chair, staring at the journal as though it might burn through his hands. "How long has she been sick?" Emily hesitated, her lip trembling before she pressed it firm. "A while. Some days she's okay. Some days, not really. She sleeps a lot now." Daniel turned to the final page, his pulse sharp in his throat. And there it was, just one line, written in Sarah's unmistakable hand. "Emily is your daughter." The words struck like thunder. He sat back hard, airless, the room tilting for a moment as he tried to absorb it. The child stood silently across from him, her posture weary, her eyes too knowing for someone her age. She wasn't afraid. She was simply waiting. He closed the journal carefully, his hands trembling despite his effort to hide it. When he looked at her again, her brown eyes caught the light, flecked with gold. Sarah's eyes, his eyes. "Why did she send you here?" he asked softly. Emily shifted her weight, her voice barely more than a breath. "She said it was time you should know." Daniel leaned back, pressing a hand against his forehead. For the first time in years, he didn't know what came next. And for the first time in years, he wanted to find out. He wanted to be furious. He wanted to demand answers for 7 silent years. But when he searched for anger, all he found was something else clawing its way to the surface. Something he had buried so deep he thought it was gone. Hope. Fear. A dangerous flicker of connection that refused to die. His voice rasped as he forced the words out. "I need to see her." Emily left his office quietly, her small footsteps fading down the hall. Daniel sat in the silence she left behind, the weight of the journal pressing on him from the desk. The ribbon, loose and frayed, lay like a sigh across the polished wood. His fingers hovered over it before he reached out and tied it back with deliberate care. The knot was uneven, imperfect, but it didn't matter. The act steadied him. He stared at the bundle as if it were fragile glass. For years nothing had shaken him. But this was different. His phone buzzed. He snatched it up. "Cancel everything for today," he ordered. His assistant hesitated. "Sir, the IPO briefing." "Postpone it indefinitely," Daniel cut in. "Just do it." He ended the call and reopened the journal, his hands trembling now. He read every line again, slower, word by word, as though the ink itself might disappear if he blinked. The city outside dimmed into night and then crept into dawn, but still he read, circling back to the lines that tore at him. "If Daniel ever sees this, it means I wasn't strong enough anymore." The weight of it crushed him. Sarah was dying. The woman he had once loved with every part of himself was slipping away, and she had sent their daughter to him as her final act. 1,000 questions swarmed his chest, but none erased the truth. He opened his laptop, logging into private databases, searching through records, addresses, anything. After 30 relentless minutes, a lead appeared, a small cancer treatment center tucked on the city's edge. Not well funded, the kind of place people went when options were gone. Daniel closed the computer with finality. His eyes drifted to the far wall where a single sketch hung in a black frame. A rough pencil drawing, nothing polished. 2 faceless figures standing hand in hand, waves curling behind them, a sunset melting down the sky. One tall, one small. Sunset Family, she had called it. She had sketched it on a napkin once, laughing, and he'd insisted it be framed. He had never taken it down, even after she left. Even after he tried to convince himself she had never meant any of it. Deep down, some part of him had never stopped wondering why. Now he knew. Sarah had never forgotten. He dragged a hand down his face, steadied himself, and left the office. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and tired hope. Beige walls, floors dulled by years of footsteps. Nurses moved briskly, paying him no special notice. He had left his suit behind, traded it for jeans and a plain sweater. He looked like anyone else, just another man clinging to someone inside. At the front desk, he gave her name. The nurse checked the file, then gave a small nod. Room 208. She's resting, but you can go in. His legs felt heavy as he walked the corridor, each step pulling him further into memories he had fought to forget. Sarah's laughter spilling through crowded alleys. The way she smeared paint across her cheek and never noticed. Quick sketches scribbled on napkins while he watched her hands move. The door was there before him. He paused, drew a slow breath, and pushed it open. Sarah lay against crisp white sheets, her frame small beneath the blanket. Her hair, once kissed gold by the sun, was dulled and thin now, and 4-line trailed from her wrist to the steady rhythm of machines. She looked impossibly fragile. His breath caught in his chest. Then her eyes opened. No surprise, just recognition, warmth, something soft that hadn't dimmed. Her lips curved faintly into a smile. You read it, didn't you? Her voice was fragile, like the hush before nightfall. Daniel stepped closer, barely trusting his own voice. I did. She studied him quietly. She found you. He nodded. She did. I'm glad, Sarah whispered, and her eyes shone. He lowered himself into the chair beside her, his movements slow, deliberate, as if the moment might break if he rushed it. His hand tightened around the journal hidden in his coat pocket. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, his words raw. Sarah closed her eyes, as if even forming the truth cost her strength she no longer had. I tried, more times than you'll ever know. But there was always something. Fear, pride, timing. And then it was too late. Daniel sat in silence, the weight of all the years pressing down, heavier than anything he'd ever carried in business or life. And for the first time in 7 years, he didn't know if he was ready for the answer, but he knew he needed it. Daniel Whitmore sat in the stiff-back chair, the hum of the hospital machines the only rhythm in the room. He hadn't seen Sarah Carter in 7 years, yet the moment his eyes landed on her, it was as if no time had passed. She wasn't just the woman lying weak against the white sheets. She was also the woman he had once laughed with, argued with, loved with everything he had. And despite everything that had unraveled between them, one truth hit him with brutal clarity. He had never stopped loving her. The silence stretched between them like an old scar neither dared press. Sarah's breaths were shallow but even, her gaze fixed on the fading light seeping through the narrow window. Daniel's hand twitched as if to reach for her, but he stopped himself. He had no right anymore. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice rough. Why did you leave? Sarah's fingers brushed the edge of the thin blanket, buying herself a moment. Her answer came quiet, almost fragile. Because I was lied to. Daniel leaned forward, confusion etched into his face. Lied to? About what? Her eyes shifted toward him, heavy with sorrow. A week before you were going to propose, someone showed me messages. Screenshots. Conversations between you and another woman. They said you'd been seeing her behind my back. His body went rigid, the accusation slicing deeper than he expected. That's not true. I know that now, she whispered. But back then, it felt like my world collapsed. You were my safe place, Daniel. And suddenly, I didn't know who you were anymore. He pushed up from the chair, anger and disbelief flooding him. You think I would throw us away like that? After everything we shared? I didn't want to believe it, Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. But the messages looked so real. And the person who showed them. She made it sound so convincing. His jaw tightened as he asked, who? Her hesitation was answer enough. Tina, she said finally. Your assistant. Daniel froze, heat rushing to his face. Tina Rowe? Are you kidding me? She told me she wanted to protect me. Sarah continued. That you were just pretending. That I deserved to know before I built my life around someone who wasn't who he claimed to be. Her eyes glistened, tears welling. And then I found out I was pregnant. The air left his lungs. He turned slowly, disbelief carved into his features. You were pregnant, and you never told me? Her voice cracked. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I couldn't tell which version of you was real. The man I loved, or the man Tina described. And I was terrified. He shook his head, pacing like a caged man. Sarah, I would never have walked away from you, or from our child. I know that now, she said, barely audible. But then, I thought if you stayed, it would be out of duty, not love. The words split him open. He turned back to her, his eyes burning. I would have stayed because I loved you, but you never gave me the chance. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she looked away. The room felt too small, too heavy with years of stolen time. Then the door creaked, and a small figure stepped inside. Emily Carter stood there, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit in one hand and a balled-up tissue in the other. She had heard more than either of them realized. "Mommy," she said, her voice shaking. Both parents turned, the weight of the moment crashing into them. Emily's lip quivered. "You didn't want Daddy to know about me?" Sarah's face broke, and her voice wavered. "No, sweetheart. It's not like that." Emily walked closer, her tears spilling freely. "I don't want to be a secret anymore. I don't want to be something sad." Daniel's knees buckled, and he knelt in front of her. With trembling hands, he reached for hers. "Emily," he said softly, "you're not a secret. You're not something sad. You are the most beautiful surprise of my life." Her small chest heaved, and she looked up at him through wet lashes. "Can we stop being strangers now?" His throat tightened as he opened his arms. Emily launched herself into him, sobbing into his suit. He held her tightly, one hand steady on her back, as though he could make up for all the years in one embrace. "I want to know you," he whispered into her hair. "Forever." From the bed, Sarah watched them, her vision blurred with tears. For the first time in years, a fragile warmth spread in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they could be more than the wreckage of lies. Maybe they could be a family again. Daniel pulled back just enough to look at Emily's tear-streaked face. "You and I," he said gently, brushing her hair from her eyes. "We've got a lot of catching up to do. You okay with that?" Emily nodded, still clinging to him. Daniel lifted his gaze to Sarah. Their eyes met, carrying years of hurt and longing, but also something else, a possibility neither dared voice just yet. Daniel still couldn't understand why Sarah had believed someone else's words over everything they had shared. The thought haunted him, but sitting by her side, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever time they had left, he wasn't walking away again. Sarah gave him a faint, grateful smile, her eyes heavy but warm. "Then let me thank you," she whispered, her hand trembling as it reached for his. He clasped it gently, feeling the fragile strength in her grip. The steady rhythm of medical machines blended softly with the low jazz spilling from a small speaker in the corner. The hospital's fluorescent lights drained the color from her cheeks, but still she smiled, as though she could shield everyone from the truth of her illness. The oncologist's words replayed in Daniel's mind. "It's not over. With aggressive, tailored treatment, there's hope." Hope was enough. Within the week, he had moved Sarah and Emily into his private estate outside the city, a sprawling villa tucked among oak trees and open sky. He converted a bright, east-facing bedroom into a full medical suite. 2 nurses rotated shifts, working alongside a renowned oncologist. Daniel had flown in from Boston. Sarah had resisted, saying she didn't want to be a burden. Daniel only took her hand and whispered, "You're not a burden. You're my family." She had no reply, only tears she tried to hide. Emily adapted faster than anyone expected. At first, she was cautious, sometimes calling him Mr. Whitmore, other times just hey. But one morning, shuffling into the kitchen with her hair tangled from sleep, she rubbed her eyes and mumbled, "Daddy, I had a strange dream." Daniel froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. Sarah looked up from her tea, her hand pausing midair. Neither spoke, afraid to break the moment. Emily, unfazed, climbed into his lap like it had always been hers. From then on, she called him Daddy, at first shyly, then with confidence, and eventually as though the word had always belonged to him. One late afternoon, when golden lights stretched across the yard, Daniel carefully guided Sarah down a hallway she hadn't walked in years. Her steps were slow, her breath shallow, but her fingers curled tightly around his arm. He opened a quiet room at the back of the house. The scent of old linseed oil clung to the air. Against the wall stood a dust-covered easel draped with a cloth. Daniel pulled it away, revealing an unfinished painting. 2 faceless figures standing on a porch by the sea, bathed in sunset's glow. Sarah's breath caught. "I started this, before everything." He brought her a stool and set out brushes and paint. "Only if you feel strong enough," he said gently. She lowered herself onto the seat, her body frail but her eyes brightening as she picked up a brush. The first stroke was shaky, but soon her hand remembered. She painted a third figure between the two silhouettes, a little girl surrounded by golden light. Emily. Daniel stood silently behind her, watching her restore what time had stolen. When the final stroke was done, Sarah let the brush fall into her lap. She whispered, almost to herself, 3 is enough for a sunrise. Daniel leaned closer. What do you mean? She lifted her gaze to him, smiling faintly through her exhaustion. A mother, a father, and a daughter. That's all it takes for a new beginning. But as she leaned back, the color drained from her face. The brush slipped from her fingers, clattering against the floorboards. Sarah. Daniel's voice was sharp now, fear rising in his chest. Her eyes fluttered shut. Sarah. He caught her as she slumped, her body frighteningly light in his arms, like holding a memory that threatened to vanish. Emily appeared at the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her small face crumpling as she took in the sight. Daniel held Sarah close, his heart pounding, refusing to let go. For the first time in years, he understood with aching clarity. This was his family. And no matter what came next, he would not lose them again. Emily's small feet slapped against the hardwood as she ran in from the hallway, just in time to see Daniel rushing toward the door with Sarah in his arms. Stay with the nurse, Daniel said, his voice breaking with urgency. I'll bring her back. I promise. He carried Sarah close against his chest, her breath shallow, her weight frighteningly light. The driver barely managed to open the door before Daniel slid into the back seat, cradling her tightly. Hospital. Now. The villa blurred into the distance as the car tore down the road. Sarah's head lolled against his shoulder, her skin cool beneath his touch. Daniel kept whispering her name again and again, as if sheer willpower and love could anchor her here, could stop time from stealing her away. Hours later, the only sound in the hospital room was the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Daniel sat slumped in a chair pulled close to the bed, his head resting against his arm, fingers clasped around Sarah's fragile hand. He had drifted into an exhausted sleep, still in yesterday's shirt, when Sarah stirred. Her lashes fluttered, her gaze unfocused at first under the harsh white light. Slowly, she turned her head toward him and smiled weakly. You stayed. Daniel sat up instantly, his voice rough but steady. I never left. The doctors called it a close call, respiratory failure brought on by stress and fatigue. But the treatment protocol was taking hold. For the first time in weeks, there was a sliver of hope. Sarah was stabilizing. Back at the villa, Emily greeted her mother with wide, tear-filled eyes and cautious joy. She wrapped her arms tightly around Sarah's waist and whispered, You scared me. I'm okay now, Sarah promised softly, brushing Emily's hair back. Daddy and I, we're here. And for a time, life found its rhythm. Daniel shifted his entire world to work remotely from the estate. Emily flourished in the calm. Afternoons were spent painting with her mother. Evenings, she insisted on helping Daniel in the kitchen, always adding far too much pepper to the food. The house, once quiet with worry, began to fill with laughter again. Daniel learned Sarah's little preferences, the exact way she liked her tea, the sound of her humming when she painted, the peace of sitting together without needing words. He learned Emily's, too, the silly voices she wanted at bedtime, the way she drew hearts in the margins of her schoolwork, the sound of her laughter echoing down the hallways. But peace never lasted long. One morning, Daniel walked into the kitchen, his phone in hand, his face unreadable. Sarah looked up immediately, dread rising in her chest. What is it? He placed the phone on the table. The headline burned in bold print. Daniel Whitmore's secret family. CEO under scrutiny amid corporate scandal. Sarah's hands went cold. The article accused her of manipulating Daniel for money, faking her illness for sympathy, even suggesting she was jeopardizing company stability. More damning still, confidential shareholder data had been leaked, sending Whitmore Industries stock into a sudden dip. Behind it all was a familiar name. Tina Rowe. She had resurfaced at a rival firm, her fingerprints traced through shell companies tied to the breach. An anonymous tip had led investigators straight to her. Sarah's face crumpled. This is my fault. Daniel's voice was steady, sharp. No, this is hers. The fallout came swiftly. The board demanded an emergency meeting. Reporters surrounded the villa gates. Shareholders whispered about leadership, about betrayal, about weakness. When the press conference was called, Daniel walked onto the stage alone. Cameras flashed, Microphones thrust forward, the air heavy with expectation. He stood in a navy suit, pale from sleepless nights, but unshaken. Raising a hand, he silenced the crowd. "I know the rumors," he began, his voice firm. "So let me make this very clear." He paused, the weight of the moment stretching before him. "Her name is Sarah Carter. She is the woman I love. And Emily," he exhaled, steadying himself, "is my daughter." Gasps rippled through the room, but Daniel didn't waver. "If anyone here believes that love is weakness, or that protecting my family makes me unfit to lead, then you're welcome to take your investments elsewhere. I will not apologize for standing by them." Without another word, he left the stage. By the end of the week, investigators confirmed what Daniel had already known. Tina had orchestrated the entire scheme. She had exploited old access credentials, funneled money through fraudulent vendors, and planted lies in the press to smear Sarah. Daniel pressed charges personally. When Tina Rowe was arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and corporate theft, the headlines changed overnight. But Daniel didn't care about the papers or the stock tickers. Back at the villa, with Sarah's hand in his and Emily curled up beside them, he had everything that mattered. And this time, he wasn't letting go. It took time, but the truth finally won. Sarah's name was cleared, her reputation restored. Back at the Whitmore estate, Emily stood on tiptoes in the kitchen, proudly pressing a crayon drawing onto the fridge with a magnet. The picture showed 3 figures: a tall man in a suit with a bright red heart on his chest, a woman holding a paintbrush with colors bursting from it, and a little girl in a cape flying just above them. In bold letters, she had written, "Daddy saved us." Meanwhile, in a quiet courtroom across town, justice was being served. The judge's gavel echoed once, firm and final. Tina Rowe stood stiffly behind the defense table as the charges were read out: fraud, embezzlement, corporate espionage. Daniel Whitmore sat in the front row, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. He didn't flinch. He didn't celebrate. Justice wasn't about revenge, but about closure. When it was over, Daniel stepped outside into the crisp daylight and drew in a steady breath. The air felt different, lighter. This long and bitter chapter was finally closed. That same afternoon, he walked into family court with a new petition. His request was simple but profound. He wanted to adopt Emily Carter as his legal daughter. The paperwork was heavy, the process formal, but his intention was unshakable. When the judge asked why, Daniel's answer was short, but it carried the weight of truth. "Because she is mine," he said, voice steady. "And she always has been." Weeks later, a small celebration bloomed inside the villa. No reporters, no executives, no flash of cameras, just family. Emily twirled around the living room in a new dress, holding the official adoption papers high like a golden ticket. "Emily Whitmore," she whispered proudly, testing the name on her tongue. She giggled. "It sounds like a superhero name." Sarah's eyes softened with tears as she looked on from the couch, her hand entwined with Daniel's. "She's earned it," she said quietly. Daniel pressed a kiss against Sarah's hand. "So have you." With Sarah regaining her strength each day and Emily thriving in her new sense of belonging, they made a decision. It was time to leave the chaos and noise behind. Time to return to the place where their story had once begun. The beach house. Nestled against the cliffs, weathered by the sea, its shutters faded but still beautiful. Daniel had kept it all those years, even when he thought he'd never see Sarah again. Now it was theirs to reclaim. They packed their lives into boxes, loaded the car, and drove south. Emily hummed in the back seat, her sketchbook balanced on her knees as the coastline stretched out before them. When they pulled into the gravel driveway, the setting sun painted the sky in golden fire. The ocean shimmered behind the house like it was waiting just for them. Sarah stepped out of the car and closed her eyes, breathing in the salty air. "It smells like forever," she whispered. Daniel nodded, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "That's because it is." Inside, the house quickly came alive again. Emily claimed the sunroom as her art studio. Daniel set up a small office in a corner nook, though he rarely touched it. Sarah filled the kitchen with herbs, music, and the warmth only she could bring. For the first time in years, life moved slower, sweeter. One evening before dinner, Emily asked for extra crayons. She sat cross-legged on the porch, brow furrowed in concentration. When she was done, she ran inside, clutching the paper with both hands. It's finished, she announced. Daniel took the drawing gently. It showed 3 figures standing hand in hand on the shore under a sky of deep orange and gold. Behind them, the waves curled toward the sand. The little house sat tucked in the background, and on the ground lay a small brown book with a ribbon, open wide, as if the story inside had finally been told. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes brimming. "That's us," Emily said proudly. "The Sunset family." Later that night, they gathered outside beneath a sky scattered with stars. A fire crackled in the stone pit, its warmth flickering across their faces. Emily was determined to roast the perfect marshmallow, holding it carefully above the flame. Sarah leaned against Daniel, wrapped in his jacket, her cheek resting against his chest. "I don't think I've ever been this happy," she whispered. Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Then we'll make sure it stays that way." Emily squealed with delight, holding up a golden-brown marshmallow like it was a trophy. "Perfect." They laughed together, the sound carrying out over the waves, a promise of all the tomorrows still to come. The tide rolled gently against the shore, the ocean breathing in steady rhythm as if it, too, was bearing witness. Above, the night sky began to glitter, stars scattered across a canvas of deep indigo, keeping quiet watch over something tender and unshakable. A family was no longer fractured. Not because of time, not because of circumstance, but because love had chosen to endure. The sun dipped low, spreading ribbons of gold and rose across the horizon. The beach stretched wide and open, calm except for the hush of waves and the whisper of seagrass bending in the wind. A few rows of white chairs faced the water, arranged with care but absent of grandeur. No towering flower arches, no orchestras, no glimmer of diamonds, just a handful of close friends, the sea breeze, and the promise of a new beginning. Sarah stood barefoot on the sand. Her dress was simple, white cotton brushing softly at her ankles, and her curls caught the salt air, glowing faintly in the fading light. She wore no veil, no crown, but her expression was luminous, steady as her gaze found the man waiting for her. Daniel stood at the end of the aisle in a linen shirt and rolled sleeves, his presence grounded and unshaken. He looked every inch the man he had become, yet there was something of the boy he once had been in the way he watched her, as if he had been waiting by the shore for her all along. Between them walked Emily, her pale yellow dress fluttering like sunlight itself. In her small arms, she carried an old, worn diary bound with a ribbon, pressed tightly to her chest. She held it as if it contained the very heartbeat of her family. When Sarah reached Daniel, Emily handed the diary to her mother and stepped back, dabbing at the corner of her eye, though her smile shone brighter than the setting sun. Sarah opened the diary slowly, her hands trembling. For a moment, the sound of the waves filled the silence. Then her voice, soft but unwavering, broke the air. "These are the last words I ever wrote here," she began. "I never imagined I'd read them aloud." Her eyes lifted to Daniel's, glistening. "Love never left me. I just lost sight of it. Thank you, Daniel, for helping me find it again." The air grew still. Daniel reached for her hands, his voice steady, carrying a weight of reverence. "From this day forward," he said, "I promise never to stop listening to what your heart speaks. Because it's your heart that brought me home." For a beat, no one moved, as if even the ocean held its breath. Then Sarah nodded, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. Emily rushed forward, her arms encircling them both, her joy spilling into laughter and tears all at once. The officiant smiled gently. "Then there's only one thing left to say. You may begin your forever." The kiss was tender, unhurried. Not just a sealing of vows, but a quiet declaration that their lives had been broken open and pieced together again, stronger than before. Applause rippled from the small gathering. The waves, too, seemed to clap against the shore in approval. Hand in hand, Sarah, Daniel, and Emily turned toward the sea. They walked slowly down the beach, their shadows stretching long and unbroken in the glow of the sinking sun. The sky above was alive with fire, orange, pink, and gold stitched across the horizon. Emily let go for a moment, darting ahead, her laughter tumbling across the sand as she spun with arms wide, claiming the world as her own. Daniel drew Sarah close, his voice low. "We made it." She leaned against him, her heart steady. "And we're still here." Behind them, On a small table, the diary lay open. Its pages fluttered in the wind, the last chapter closed. Yet around them, a new story had already begun. It would be written in mornings warmed by ocean light, drawings taped proudly to the kitchen fridge, piano notes drifting from open windows, and evenings gathered around a fire with marshmallows turning golden on sticks. The sun finally sank, leaving its afterglow stretched across the water like a blessing. And in that light, Daniel, Sarah, and Emily walked forward, into love, into peace, into a life once fractured but now whole again, stronger than time, stronger than loss. And far above, the stars blinked, bearing witness to a family found, a promise kept, and a forever just beginning. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to be part of our journey. Tap subscribe so you never miss another chapter of love, redemption, and family. And if Daniel Whitmore, Emily Carter, and Sarah Carter's story made you smile or brought a tear to your eye, hit the like button to help it reach others who might need a reminder that healing and second chances are always possible. Your encouragement keeps these stories alive and growing. Until we meet again, keep kindness close, hold on to hope, and never stop believing in the strength of love to bring people home. We'll be back soon with another story waiting to be told.